So my son asked me today about Martin Luther King and the history surrounding, that period in America. So the Martin Luther King, as we all know, was a very powerful, very eloquent, very charismatic, and effective leader in the black community. Some say that he was the last real black leader who was in it for the purpose of elevating and lifting up the black people with no hidden agenda in mind. And Martin Luther King was instrumental in bringing attention to the injustices that were taking place in America towards black people at that time. Now, Thurgood Marshall was the attorney during that time. He was doing the same thing that Martin Luther King was doing with his protest in the courtroom. Thurgood Marshall was the attorney who helped to get all these various laws passed, like the Civil Rights Act and various Voting Rights Act. These laws that were passed, it was Thurgood Marshall who went into the courtroom and defeated very high-powered lawyers with his eloquence and his dedication. Now, Thurgood Marshall also had two very powerful mentors. He had Charles Hamilton Houston, who was a middle-class Washington, D.C. native, whose father was an attorney as well, and his mother was a seamstress. He was born in 1895. And then another mentor of Thurgood Marshall was Walter White. He was from Atlanta, another middle-class brother. His father was a mail carrier and his mother was a housewife. And they mentored Thurgood Marshall to be a social justice warrior, to be a champion. And there are others. This is just the name that I know, but there were many powerful, uplifted black people that were working for the cause of the upliftment of black people. These are two that I know that mentored Thurgood Marshall. What happened, my son is asking me about the welfare system, which I feel was the death knell of black America. I feel the welfare system was decimating the black community, and to a degree almost like crack itself. So you had the welfare system, once it was passed by Lyndon B. Johnson. What it included was they would reward these women for having children out of wedlock, penalize them if a man moved into the house, and take them off of welfare. So you had several young teenage girls having babies out of wedlock with no man in the family. And I think this started, back in the 60s and continued all the way up into almost 2000. It's still kind of a little bit there, but not like it was. It was actually a meal ticket. So they had welfare queens making huge amounts of money just by having these out of wedlock children. And then what happened there is, of course, these girls and boys running around the streets with no parental guidance. What the little girls did was they followed mama's footsteps and had babies so they could have money, and the little boys began running around the streets in large part, and not coincidentally, the crime bill was passed, the prison for profit became instituted, and then you had basically what I feel was a modern day slavery of having these kids run with no parental guidance, and then going to a life of crime and going into prison. But I think the whole thing was very, very detrimental to the black community. I would have much rather have seen a job training program, a program that promoted family values, a program that promoted working and personal responsibility. I have no problem with that, and I think most black people that I talk to, they would much rather have seen our community work in that way. Can you look at back in the 1920s, 1930s, black people took pride on being responsible. They took pride in having a family. I know my father, may he rest in peace, grew up in a two-family home. He grew up working, watching his father work, grew up working. And so I'd like to see, I think now it's turning around, and I see a lot of young black men and women getting married, having children, and raising those children in a holistic way, to where empowering them to let them know that they can do and be what they want to do and be. And they have there's a lot more resources amongst black people now, to where they can adequately raise children and help them to be successful. So I think it's turning around now, but I want to see us continue to move forward and be all we can be. And never forget, you're born to win, forward ever, backward now. One of my favorite people during that time was Thurgood Marshall, because he actually went into the courtroom and obliterated these lawyers and got these laws to be passed. I feel like he was neutralized when they put him on the Supreme Court. And he even made a statement when he was on the Supreme Court. The Ku Klux Klan used to wear white, meaning that some of the judges on the Supreme Court with him at that time he felt were as racist as any Klansman. Which, you know, surprise, surprise. I mean, what else is new? So, he's one of my favorites. I also have I like Martin Luther King, and I have definitely a love for Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, Marcus Garvey, Noble Drew Ali. They weren't during, Noble Drew Ali and Marcus Garvey weren't during that time, but Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X was. And so I grew up admiring all these people. And then of course the Black Panthers, who've been vilified and demonized by the press. But what people don't realize is the Black Panthers are responsible for the breakfast program that's all over the United States now. It started as a Panther program. So I really have a soft spot for them too, as black leaders. And if you look at the COINTELPRO, you can Google that. It shows how the Black Panthers were demonized and vilified and assassinated. They assassinated Fred Hampton. They assassinated several others. Just straight up killed them because they were having influence not only in the black community but throughout the American community. See, the Black Panthers, people don't realize, were actually an inclusive organization. They would never into a hate white thing. That's the problem they had with some of the other organizations. They wanted to include whites in their quest for struggle. Those were some, but I think now it's a point where every man, every woman is responsible. I'm a big proponent at this point of personal responsibility, that we all have to make it to be our best, and then we can unify. So first you have your family, you unify within that family. Can you get along with your son, your daughter, your mother, your father? That's sometimes a big challenge, your brother, your sister. So the first thing is unify. First, actually unify within yourself. Get yourself together, love yourself, love your family. Then you stretch out. Now if you have another family and you can link up with another family, you're beginning now to build a community. Once you build that community, then you have a force to be reckoned with. But as far as everybody getting together, I think those days are over, because we're not a myopic community. We all have different thoughts and different ways of thinking and different frames of references and different value points. But we do have some things in common. And where we have a common ground, I think we should come together, and come together financially, and come together spiritually where we can, and get our community uplifted. I mean, you know, you look at the Indian American, they have a community, and you don't see Negroes having stores in their communities, but you go to a black community, you see Indians. You see Arabs, they have an Arab community. You don't see Negroes having a store in the Arab community, but you see Arabs in our community. And so et cetera, Chinese, Japanese, whatever you want to say, they're all in our community, but we're not in theirs. So I think one of the first things we need to do is somehow, and I don't have all the answers, get control of the economics of our community. and stop making everybody else millionaires and make ourselves millionaires. Like in the Jewish community, my father used to tell me the dollar would go around about 8 times in the Jewish community before it left that community. So the butcher, the baker, the tailor, they would all support each other within that community. In the black community, it usually just goes right out, goes in your hand and goes right out into another community. Now the footnote on that is that prior to quote-unquote integration, every town had a thriving black community that was very economically sound. You had black doctors, lawyers, you had black bakers and butchers and pharmacists. So the money did stay in the black community at that time. Now, and I'm not an advocate of separation, but I am an advocate of economic empowerment. So I think that there's a balance to get that thriving black community back. Now I make an effort to spend money in my community, but I do like good service and good product. So the business owners want to make sure they provide first-class service, and then the consumers want to make sure they just maybe go an extra block, pay an extra dollar, whatever it is, and support that business. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that happen, and I'm actually seeing that happen now. As the youth, like my son and some of his friends are entrepreneurs that develop their own business. Many of them are getting into crypto and on the stock market. I wasn't even thinking about the stock market at that age, in my 20s. But some other communities were. But now we as a people are becoming more abreast. Because the bottom line is, we want to be functional and productive members of the society in which we find ourselves. Regardless of the injustices that have been done in the past and are still being done in many cases now, we want to be productive and functional members of the society in which we live.